Okay, it's now 1 o'clock in our time zone, 5 o'clock in your time zone, so we'll start with the seminar. Today's seminar is about CYPE architecture and how you can use it to start a project in BIMserver.center. So my colleague Vicente yesterday told you about BIMserver.center. BIMserver.center, if you recall correctly, is our online platform for sharing all the different Ifc files that comprise a model. So one of the first things that you have to do to start a project is start with an Ifc file of your physical model, of the architecture of the model. You can do so if you go to one of our main modeling tools, that is CYPE architecture. Let's start a new model here in CYPE architecture, and we will get a look at how things work more or less. Okay, as you can see, one of the first things that asks me when I start any project is to select the project that we are going to use in BIMserver.center. So what I have to do first is click here and select project. And because I have here the synchronizer ready, I can connect to as many projects as I want from my library in BIMserver.center. So let's select a project that I've already done. Or in case I don't have a project here, I can start directly a new project, clicking here and create new project. In this case, I have another project ready, so let's select a project here. And once we have it, what we're going to do is that we're going to start with the modeling itself. Once we've got the project already selected, as you can see here, this project already has some Ifc files that I've done previously. One of the other ways that you can start a project in BIMserver.center is if you use OpenInsight, which is a new application that we have launched very recently that allows you to set your project in a space in the world. And so all the data regarding its location can be directly transposed into CYPE architecture. But in this case, we will start without this information from OpenInsight because we can start directly in CYPE architecture. Let's click accept. And now you will see that we will be greeted with the main screen for our modeling. If we look at the top left corner, you will see that we have 3 tabs here that are called Sketch, Architecture, and Furniture. And that is because CYPE architecture is meant as a way of modeling your project from start to finish. That is, you can start with a main idea, sketching here in the Sketch panel, and then switch to the Architecture tab, where you can start introducing elements that later will be exported in your Ifc file. As you can see here, we can export directly to BIMserver.center, or we can switch to one of the main applications that we have here for structural analysis, construction, urban planning, or drawing compositions, for example, or even builds of quantities. So once we finish the definition of our building here in the Architecture tab, we can switch to the Furniture tab, which, despite its name, it's not really a tab designed for just furniture, but instead it's a tab that allows us to introduce home appliances, sanitary appliances, swimming pools, and all this information will be later exported into BIMserver.center. As you can see here, both in the Architecture tab and the Furniture tab, we've got a button called BIM Model. And that is because all the entities that we are introducing here will be turned into a BIM entity. As you can see here, we can have construction elements, openings, connections, spaces. And then this information will be later exported, so you can use it, for example, for structural analysis, for building installations, for budgeting, fireproofing, and so on. So let's begin with the Sketch tab right here. And as you can see, just like many other drafting softwares from around the world, we have a system of views and layers. The layers, despite its name, it's not something that it's meant to contain one kind of element, but instead layers are a way of organizing all your workspace. So you can have many things at the same time and either block its visibility or block its content so you don't accidentally overwrite your progress. So let's start, for example, with a new layer that we will call sketch. And as the name implies, this layer will contain all our sketching features. You can start, for example, with a system of references with grids, or in case you have a DWG or the DXF file, you can import the drawing first, and you can start drawing on top of that drawing. Let me show you an example that I have right here. Here with the template views manager, this icon right here, I can import the DWG and the DXF files, so I can later assign it to one of the views that I have right here. So once we have the model already set, let's click accept. And now if I go here to the DXF DWG template, I could assign it to this view, clicking here and select it. Let's click accept. And as you can see here, we have a drawing that we can draw on top. It's one of the main ways to start your sketch, or you can even start directly in the architecture tab on top of a DXF or DWG file. And the other way that you can use is working directly with this system of references. So let's start, for example, adding a grid. And grids, as you may imagine, are a very simple way of structuring your model. We'll start first with some lines in the X direction, for example. And let's add some more lines in the Y direction, like so. Okay, now that I have my grid reference set, let's click accept. And you will see here that indeed we have our grids already set, so we can work on top of them. Okay, now that we have our references set, we can jump to the drawing panel here. As you can see, we have many basic tools that we can use to start drawing our sketch. We have to first switch here to this new layer that I have drawn. And from then on, all the data that I'll start adding here will be linked to this layer right here. If you look at the views tab right here, you will see that we are working directly on a 3D space. But in case we wanted it, we could work with floors, or we could work with elevations in a 2D view, that is. As you can see here, we have the axis. And in case we want to switch this view for a brief while, we can orbit around it. As you can see, we can orbit, and we can go back here in the projection to the original projection, like so. Okay, let's go back to the 3D views, and let's start adding some sketch elements into our layer. So let's start, for example, with lines. If you have worked with other drafting programs, you will see that this way of sketching is very simple because it automatically snaps to either your templates, if you have imported a template here, or with grid in case you have inserted a grid. And once you insert 3 or more bounding edges, you will get a surface automatically inserted. Let's insert some more surfaces with the quadrilateral tool right here. As you can see, many tools have a entry mode, and depending on which element you're using, you will be given different options. So for example, here we have an entry point given 3 points by diagonal or at a selected point. Let's use, for example, by diagonal. And as the name implies, what we're going to do is that we're going to select 2 ends of our rectangle, like so. Many times when you introduce new data, you will get this little window right here in case you wanted to correct any of the measurements that you have inserted right here. So let's say that in this case, I wanted to make it a little bit shorter and make it maybe 5 meters long, like so. Let's click here on the tick arrow. And indeed, as you can see, I have a new surface inserted with this tool. Same thing goes for other tools like circles, ellipses, polygons, inscribe polygons, and so on. Then we also have here the colors tab, which works more or less as a way of assigning materials to our surfaces. And this is very useful in case you're working with a very complex model and you would like to visually set apart all the different elements of this project. So for example, let's create a new material. And as you can see here, we can have two colors, and those two colors are in regards to which face we're seeing right here. So for example, let's select these two colors like so. We can also set a different opacity. For example, let's set it at 50%. And now that I have that color, we can assign it to the different elements. As you can see here, we get this dotted parchment on top of the texture that we want to apply. And let's say that we wanted to apply to this surface only. So we left click, then right click, and as you can see, if we select the color that we wanted to apply, we get two layers with the different colors and with a different opacity. Now, let's continue setting some basic guidelines for the sketch tab. And let's continue with the introduction of data. For example, here in 3 points, if we do something like this, or at selected point, we could insert the dimensions like so, 5 width, 3 heights, and here the insertion point is just something that we will be using later with many architectural elements. And this basically serves as a way of telling the program where our cursor will be in regards to the element. So for example, in this case, I've selected this insertion point on the lower left side. And as you can see, my cursor is aligned with that part of the element. But let's say that I were to switch it, for example, to the center. As you may imagine, indeed, now my element is centered on my cursor directly on the center. Let's switch it back here. And let's continue with the sketch tab here. You can also add parallel and curved surfaces. Right now I'm working on a 2D space, as you can see. This is very useful when we're working with multiple views, like the ones that I've shown you here. Because if you want to be faithful to your floor, for example, all you have to do is select here the 2D mode while you are in that view, and then select which floor you are working on. As you can see here, because we're working on floor 0, and we're working in its view, into the view, it automatically sets it to floor 0. If we were to switch, for example, to the elevations, the same thing would happen. And if I were to switch to 3D mode, I could work freely on the 3D space. Let's go back to the 3D views and let's continue inserting elements. For example, let's insert something with some height here. You can also add triangles like so, very easily. Same for circles. And let's say that this would be our basic overview to start working for the architectural tab. We could now switch to the architecture tab and start with the definition of the architecture itself. If you recall correctly, I started this session talking about the BIM model tab. The BIM model tab, what allows us is to see exactly how all the different elements that we insert are going to be exported into our Ifc file. And as you can see here, we also have a levels toolbox. This allows us to insert new levels. For example, let's insert this new floor right here. Let's give it an elevation and let's create a floor view. That's going to be 1.5 meters above ground. So once I add a new level here, you will see I will get here a new view in the floors view. If I switch to it, I can work directly on top of it. Let's go back to the 3D view. And if you can see here correctly, we have these dotted lines that are the references that I had before here with the grids that have been updated to take into account that I have inserted a new floor. So now that we have inserted all the different levels, we can start with the construction elements. As you can see, we have 5 main tools that are vertical elements, things like walls, curtain walls, louvers, railings, and even columns, because we can also insert the structure here in this process in CYPE architecture. And later we can use this structure in many other tools like BIM or SiteCAD. If we switch to the horizontal elements, we will see something more or less the same. We see here floor slabs, suspended ceilings, and beams as well. If we switch to roofs, same thing, we have slope formations, roof tiles, and special roof elements. And here we have the openings. Once we have all the vertical and horizontal elements in the 3D space, we can start adding different kinds of openings. We can insert very standard openings, or we can insert doors, windows, skylights, glazed surfaces, and so on. And then when we finished with the definition of the vertical elements, horizontal elements, the roofs, and the openings, we can proceed to the connections. As you can see, we have many different kinds of connections pre-built, and we could work with stairs, ramps, elevators, and many different accessories for all the different kinds of connections that we have. So, without further ado, let's start introducing some construction elements. Let's start, for example, with the structure. Let's first create a layer that we will name structure. And once we have it, we will switch to it. So we will insert all the different data on this layer. Let's click here on column. And as you will see here, we have a new menu here that allows us to give it a reference. This reference will be later used in the BIM model. We can assign it to a level, which will also be exported to the BIM model. You can easily draw something in the 3D space and then assign it to a different level. So you don't have to have something directly on top of the different planes that you see here from the dotted lines. And the different physical properties of that element. In this case, we can set the height. As you can see here, we have a new tab called Properties, and this allows us to set all the physical properties of our element, as well as creating a new type. Types allows us to create one basic database that will be reused all along our project. So let's create a new column. For example, let's name it 30 times 30. It will be reinforced concrete. And as you can see here, we can set tags that will be later used when we work with our different softwares for structures, installations, and so on. For example, let's name it like so. And once we have it, we can block it, so we can use it as many times as we want without overwriting all the different properties that I have set here. So let's continue with our introduction of data. As you can see here, I've set the introduction point to be on the middle. It is set like this by default. So let's start inserting our elements into the space. In case we want it, we could switch to the mode here. So we are faithful to the floor that we're working on. For example, in this case, we're working on on floor 0. So everything will be snapped, as you can see here, to this floor. But in case you wanted to snap, for example, to the first floor, same thing will apply, as you can see here. And in case we want to edit something that we have inserted, all we have to do is go here to the edit tool, and you will see here that we have exactly the same menu that I've shown you before. I'm going to switch now to the floor view so you can get an idea of how you can create your very own workflow inside architecture. I like to work directly in a 3D space, like I've shown you up until now, But in case you wanted to work with floors, you could directly work in floors, just as long as you keep in mind what I've told you about vertical and horizontal elements. You have to select here the 2D mode, and the floor will be automatically selected. So let's continue adding more elements, like so. And once we have finished, we right-click, and we can switch to a new tool. Let's add, for example, now here in horizontal elements, the beams. I'm going to switch to 3D view because it is more comfortable for me. And I'm going to switch here to the 3D mode. I'm going to select a new type for this beam, just like we did before with the columns. Let's name it as well, for example, 30 times 30. And I'm going to insert it in with this insertion point. As you can see here, I have this kind of snapping to the corners of the element. And in case I wanted it, I could activate even more object snaps here with this toolbar right here. I'm going to activate some more object snaps so you get what I'm talking about. As you can see here, now I can snap to the middle point of an element, to corners, to extensions of reference points, etc. So I'm going to add here new beams. As you can see, the beams can be also as well placed freely on a 3D space, but I'm going to apply them here. Once we have inserted our structural elements, we can switch to the horizontal elements tab, and we can start inserting the different floors that we're going to use. This is where the sketch tab will be most useful, because if you recall correctly, we can use many different kinds of introduction for different elements. In this case, for the beams, what I'm doing is that I'm using the default introduction method, that is by points. But later, when we introduce the beams, the slabs, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. One more beam right here, and there you go, we have it. Let me create a new layer, and I'm going to show you how the introduction of the slabs works. So let's create a new layer that I'm going to name slabs. Let's switch to it, and let's start with introduction of horizontal elements and floor slab. As you can see here, we are greeted with another window, and it works more or less the same like the vertical elements that we have seen before. In this case, I have many different kinds of entry modes, and I have by points and by the surface area. And this is where we're going to use the sketches that we used before. Let's say, for example, that we're going to use this introduction method by surface area. Let's create a new type. For example, screed. This is going to be a screed, for example. Let's select a category. In this case, I can also select different kinds like roofs, internal floor slabs, screeds, external floor slabs. In this case, it's going to be screed. Let's set thickness, for example, 30 centimeters. And for all the elements that we are inserting right now, we can set different kinds of colors, just as long as we have set them here in the sketch tab, if you recall correctly. And now here, as you can see, the adjustment is quite different from what we have seen before in the vertical elements, because we are working with adjustments in regards to the floor. As you can see here, we can have it above ground, in the middle, or below ground. So let me show you exactly how this works. Remember, we are using the entry mode by surface area. As you can see here, depending on which adjustment I select, I can introduce my floor slab in regards to the drawing that I have drawn here. So let me change the introduction for these other slabs right here. And let's continue with our model. Now, let's try another method introduction for slabs, and that is the other one that we have here by points. I would recommend you to always try to insert the slabs more or less on the middle of your structural elements and your facades, because later, if you want to use this model for analysis for energy efficiency, thermal and acoustic reinforcement, and so on, you would like to tell the program that your floor slabs are in contact with the structure and the facade and so on. So let's insert a floor slab, and as you can see, it is literally inserted in a 3D space. I'm going to insert one right here. And once we have it, let's select the endpoint and right click. And there we go, we have our first slab. Let's do the same for this other slab right here. And we will now be switching to vertical elements. Let's add this last floor slab here. And floor slabs are not the only structural element that you can insert. As you can see, you can also insert other kinds of horizontal elements like the ones that I told you before. You could insert, for example, sorry, my connection froze a bit for a second. Let's continue. Okay, now I have my floor slabs already inserted. So now let's go to the vertical elements. And I'm going to show you how to insert the vertical elements with the floor views that we have created before. Let's go, for example, to floor 0 right here. And let's start to insert, for example, some walls. As you can see here, when I click the walls option, I get this new window where, just like we did before, we can set the reference, in which level is it going to be, the entry mode, the height, the properties, if you want to assign it to a new type. And in regards to this new type, if you want to set a category, we have, for example, external facade, party wall, internal partition, basement wall, thickness, and the color. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a new wall in the ground floor by polyline with this adjustment, like so. As you can see here, I can insert all the different elements continuously, as if it were a polyline in AutoCAD, for example. Now, if we switch to the 3D view, you will see that indeed I have added these walls right here, and they are 3 meters high, and they are based on floor 0 because we'll be working with this floor view. Let's continue with the definition of vertical elements. As you can see here, we can add, for example, curtain walls, louvers, and railings. So, for example, let's add a railing here. As you can see, it works exactly the same as if we were to add another wall. And if we go to its properties, you will see that we can set a handrail, how it's going to be its width, its depth, if you want balusters, if you want panels as well. And for example, let's add some balusters. Let's click accept, and you see that it has automatically added both the balusters and the window panes. Let's continue with the introduction of data. I'm going to switch here to this projection so we can switch to the floor plan as is. And let's insert, for example, a new kind of wall. For example, this is going to be a partition, sorry, it's a partition wall. And it's going to be, for example, 50 centimeters. And this one, I want to introduce it by surface area, for example. Let's use this surface that I've generated before. And as you can see, I can freely generate in a 3D space all different kinds of walls that do not comply with what you would normally expect in an architectural model. You don't have to work with straight lines, as you can see here. So let's create a new layer, and let's name it walls. And now, because I forgot to assign these walls to this layer, I'm going to show you how to assign them to a layer. As you can see here with the assign layer button, all we have to do is select the layer, in this case walls, select our elements, and once we have finished selecting all the different elements, we have to right click, and that would be it. Sorry for the inconvenience. And there we go. Right. Now, if I wanted to, I could get rid of the sketch. I click here, and I can turn it invisible. So now I can work with a more clean view of this project. This is the main tool that we would use layers for. Layers are meant as a way of tidying up your project so you can work easier on top of it. So now let's continue here in floor 0, adding some more walls, vertical elements, walls, and let's continue with this partition wall. And I'm going to insert it, for example, by a polyline, as I did before. Let's switch to this projection in this view, and let's continue. Okay, now that I have all my walls inserted into the model, what I can do is click this button right here called Intersection Solutions. What this tool will do is that it will go one by one for each wall and see which clashes there can be between all the different geometries that we have inserted. So we won't have two elements that accidentally overlap. So for example, let's say that I have mixed up this wall and instead I've drawn it up until here. If I click here in Intersection Solutions, what the program will do is that it will detect that this wall goes further inside this wall than necessary, and it will automatically shorten it. So you can see here, I have two different elements that are not overlapping, and that is because I've solved this intersection with Intersection Solutions. Now let's continue with the construction elements. We have seen vertical elements, horizontal elements, and now if we wanted to, we could continue with roofs, openings, and connections. Let's continue with openings, and let's work in this 2D view. If you recall correctly, we have many different kinds of openings that we can insert into a project. We have, for example, standard openings, doors, windows, skylights, glazed surfaces. So let's start, for example, with doors. As you can see here, we get a new window, and just like every other element that we have inserted up until now, we can set all the different properties of this element. We can set a new type like we did before. We can set which kind of opening it's going to be. We have many different kinds, as you can see here. We can have sliding doors with double leaves and single leaves. We can set different dimensions for this opening as well. So for example, let's make it a hinge door with double leaf. And let's make it, for example, 1.5 meters. We can also set the height of the opening. I'm going to leave it as default. And we can also set the frame, how wide it's going to be. So I'm going to leave it as this. We can also add glazed openings, like I've shown you before with the railings, like here. And we can also set which kind of handle it is going to be. In the future, we're going to add even more kinds of elements that you can insert into CYPE architecture, because bear in mind that CYPE architecture has been very recently launched by our company. It is completely free of charge forever with free technical support, and in the coming future it's going to encompass even more properties than the ones that we are seeing right now. So let's select a new handle here like this one, and with the colors same thing applies as we have said before. Now, as you can see here, we get a new tool for the insertion, and this insertion point is in regards to the height of this element. Let me show you in a 3D view. let's hide the slabs, for example, and you will see what I'm talking about. As you can see here, I can insert my element freely into the walls, and my cursor is set to the insertion point that I have set here. So if I were to work in a 2D view in a floor plan, you will see that what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this element in regards to the ground. Let's switch to the floors view and let's see what I'm talking about. Let's insert this here, and as you can see, we can select the adjustment just like we did before. By default, I would recommend to set it on the center line of the element, and we can also set on which side is going to be opened. I'm going to put it here on the inside, and once you have it, you can select on which point of the wall is it going to be flushed. As you can see here, we can set it on the extremes or in the middle part of this wall. I'm going to set it in the middle. And now we have in our floor plan view automatically added this kind of door. And if we switch to the 3D view, you will see that indeed we now have the door inserted into our wall with the hole already produced. Now I'm going to show you why it is important to bear in mind where our insertion point is with windows. As you may imagine, windows work more or less the same as all the different elements that I've shown you here, like doors. And you can set many different kinds of shapes. For example, you can work with circular and rectangular windows, fixed windows, hinge windows, sliding windows. I'm going to work, for example, with a hinge window, and I'm going to make it, for example, 2 meters wide. Why not? And 1.5 meters high. We can make it to have many different kinds of leaves. For example, we can have 3 leaves. And now when I insert it into the 3D model, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. As you can see here, I'm working first in a 3D view with 3D mode activated, and I'm going to set it into floor 0 for the BIM model. Now you can see that the insertion point is set by default on the middle lower part. And if I scroll around my model, you will see that the window does indeed snap to my cursor on its lower middle part. So if I were to insert it freely on the 3D space, like so, you would see that I could set whichever height I want. Just like we did before with the doors, we have to set where is it going to open and its insertion point in regards to the wall. Let's set it, for example, in the interior, and you will see that indeed we have inserted this window in the 3D space by hand, freely. But in case you wanted to be even more specific, what you could do is, as you can see here, we have this option right here that's called height above ground, and here you can set the height that's going to be between your cursor and the floor in regards to the insertion point. So let's go back to the floor view here in floor 0, and you will see what I'm talking about. Let's insert this window right here, for example, and let's put it at about 1 meter from above the ground. And this height is going to be in regards to the insertion point that I have selected. But if I wanted to, I could switch it to whichever point I want. In this case, I'm going to leave it as is. And now let's insert it. Let's select where is it going to open, how is it going to be flashed in regards to the wall. And this is where you can work with the adjustments. As you can see, in this case, I flushed it into the inner part of the wall, and it's not truly in a parallel position in regards to its inner side, but instead it's put exactly on the middle line that creates that line. So if you wanted to make as adjusted, for example, to one side, all you will have to do is to edit the insertion point, go here to the adjustments, and toy around with the different insertion points. For example, now I have set it so it is directly parallel to the interior side of this wall. And if you recall correctly, I wanted it to insert it 1 meter above the ground. So if we were to create a reference line here, you would see that indeed it is 1 meter from the lower part of our floor. This is very useful if you want to work exclusively in a 2D view here in the floors. So it allows you to freely see how your floor plan is going to look like. Now let's continue, for example, with other kinds of openings here in the construction elements tab. And let's see, for example, how the skylights and the openings work. So let's go back to our 3D view and let's create, for example, a new layer that we're going to name openings. Let's select it. And now if I bring back my sketch, you will see why it is so useful to use our sketch. As you can see here, when I select the openings tool, I can select an entry mode for it. And we have two basic points. We have by geometry and by points. If I were to use by geometry, as the name implies, I can insert freely in a 3D space this kind of geometry on top of it. I can insert, for example, rectangular or circular openings. For example, let's set a new opening here. And let's put it on this wall, for example. Now, let's say that I want to introduce an opening that I have already generated in my sketch tab, just like we did here. If you recall correctly, I inserted here the circle, and now you are going to see why I did that. If we go back to here, sorry, let's deactivate the walls, you will see that indeed I have here circle. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert another hole here that is slightly larger. For example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this other surface that I've done here previously into a glazing. To do so, all I have to go is go back here to openings and glaze surface. As you can see here, we have many different kinds of entry modes. We have by points and by surface area. I'm sure that right around now you have a basic idea of how the different entry modes work. So I'm not going to go too much into it, and I'm going to show you how it works. Let's set, for example, a frame, and let's select a surface area, like so. And if we deactivate our sketch, you will see that indeed we now have a glazed surface that is exactly the one that we have drawn before in our sketch tab, and that has also this frame and this glazing added. So as you can imagine, you can go very crazy with this and make many different kinds of strange glazings on your walls. Just as long as you can draw it in a 3D space, you can make it inside architecture. And now we have arrived to our last but not least important element of construction elements, and that is the connections menu. If you recall correctly, we have many different kinds of connections, 3 mainly, and we can insert them with different insertion methods. We have stairs, ramps, and elevators. Let's insert, for example, a staircase. We can insert it, for example, by span. This is the most rigid tool that we have for stairs, as you have to first set how wide is going to be the stair, the number of steps, as well as the thread and the riser. So for example, I'm going to insert it into this direction here. It's going to be on the ground floor. And let's say that the thread is 30 and the riser is 50. So if my maths don't fail me, I add, for example, 20 steps, you can see that it overrides the main height. So I could insert it like so. But as you can see, this is a very rigid tool and it doesn't really allow me to make more specific insertions. I have to be more cautious when I insert it because I have to take into account all the different physical properties of its element. I'm going to move it. As you can see here, we also have the move tool here. It's the first time that I've used it. We click on an element, its insertion point, and we can now move it as well. We could also do the same if we wanted to copy this element with the copy tool here. And as you may imagine, it works exactly the same. Now, let's say that I wanted to insert another kind of staircase. All I have to do is go back to connections, and we have a second way of inserting stairs, and that is stair span defined by 3 points. All we have to do is set the riser, and if we select the width and its final insertion point, you will see that our staircase is made organically as we set its final insertion point. Let's make it so it gets all the way to this floor right here. Right here. And you will see that it automatically sets the stair width, the number of steps, thread, the riser, and so on. Perfect, isn't it? Now, let's see the final method of introduction for staircases. If we go back here to Stairwell tool, you will see that this is more or less like the first tool that we have shown you before for stairs. But instead, what it does is that it makes multiple repetitions of this kind of staircase that you select. So let's start here with the stairwell tab. Let's set the starting level, ground floor, the number of repetitions. We can put as many as we want, for example, 10 repetitions. And we can set, for example, if you want a right rating or a left rating, which will be automatically added. Let's set, for example, a left rating because I'm going to use this kind of staircase. Now, if we switch to stair span, you'll see that we can set, just like we did before here, stair width, the number of steps, the thread, and the riser. I'm going to leave it by default. And now let's switch to the landing tab. Here in the landing tab, what we're going to do is that we're going to add a little slab that will serve as a connection between all the different steps of the staircase, all the different flights of the staircase, as you may imagine. So I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to make it, for example, 20 centimeters thick. And last but not least, if you recall correctly, because we have set an automatic railing on the left side of our staircase, we can select the properties of this railing, like its height, which category it's going to be, if it's going to be a handrail or if it's going to have balusters. And if you recall correctly, when we inserted before the balusters, it's going to work exactly the same. Let's set its separation, for example, every 7 centimeters. And we can also set the colors like I've shown you before. Now let's click accept. And oh, as you may imagine, this is a beta version of our last version 2022P. So it is possible that sometimes you may have many errors like the one that you're seeing right now. So in case you may have an error like this and you want to keep in touch with us, you can send an email at support@CYPE.com. I'm going to write right now in the chat this address. So in case you have any kind of difficulties, you can keep in touch with us. It is support@CYPE.com. You will have it here in the chat for your future reference. So in case something like this happens to you, we can work it out. Okay, let's continue with the modeling of our module. Let's open a new instance of CYPE architecture and let's continue with the modeling. Up until now, you may imagine that the modeling is very simple. It is very user-friendly, and if you are an architect, it's pretty close to what you're used to working with. As you can see, CYPE architecture automatically has saves of your project each time you make any major changes, so you don't have to worry if something like this happens to you anytime. Now, let's continue here in the Architecture tab with the connections. Let's make a new layer called Connections. And I'm going to show you once and for all how the stairwell works. I'm going to leave everything by default. I'm going to set it just with 2 repetitions. And you will see exactly how it looks like. There we go. This is exactly what I was talking about before. As you can see, it has the different kind of typology that we have selected before in its insertion. And it has automatically added the landings every 10 steps. And it has added as well the railings. As you can see here, I can go one by one and change its element once I have inserted it. It's not a homogeneous element, but rather it is a tool to help you insert multiple elements at the same time. So let's say that, for example, I wanted to put some balusters here. What I will have to do is edit it here. And indeed, you can see that I can have, with one insertion element, many different kinds of elements at the same time that I can edit one by one. Now, let's continue with the other kinds of connections that we have, and those are ramps. As you may imagine, ramps work exactly the same as stairs, so I'm going to be very brief with this. As you can see here, we have 3 main insertion points, sorry, 3 main insertion elements, just like we did before with stairs. We can add ramp spans defined by 3 bonds, and ramp cores. So let's insert, for example, a ramp span defined by 3 points. And you will see exactly what I'm talking about. Let's make it this wide and let's make it this tall. Click accept, and we now have a ramp added to our model. One very common question that we get here at CYPE is, how would I add a sloped roof? Now that we have inserted ramps, if you think about it, a ramp is more or less like a sloped roof. So how would I insert a sloped roof with what you have learned up until now? I have, if you go here to horizontal elements and floor slab, you will see that I can add a floor slab by points or by surface area. So if I were to have a sketch of my roof here, all I would have to do is select my surface area, select the sketch that I have made for the roof, and turn it into a roof here with the adjustment that I've told you before. Let's do it right now very briefly. I'm going to switch here to the sketch. Let's go back here to the sketch tab, and let's draw, for example, a roof right here, like so. Now that I have my sketch ready, I can switch back to the architectural tab, and I can turn this into a slope roof. What I have to do is go back here to horizontal elements, floor slabs, and select the entry mode by surface area. We can select, as you can see here, have the shadow of the floor slab or the roof that we want to insert. We can set the adjustment. For example, let's set it under sketch. And once we select the surface, indeed, we have our slope roof. We don't have one main insertion system for these kinds of elements because we believe that each client should find its ideal workflow inside our projects. So we won't force any kind of tools upon you. It's up to you if you want to insert, for example, these kind of elements with these kinds of entry modes, or if you want to make it by hand in 3D view, or if you want to work with floors or so on. So let's switch back to the 3D view and let's continue with the connections. I'm going to disable my slabs here. Sorry, let's switch first to the layers. You cannot hide a layer that you are currently using, so we have to first switch to another layer, and then we can hide all the different ones, like the sketch one that I was talking about. Now, if you go back to the connections menu, you will see that you have one final tool, and that is the elevators or lifts. It depends on how you call it, on where you live. We have two main kinds of introductions, and that is a standard elevator that works more or less what we have done before with the staircases. So you have to first set its properties, like its width, its depth, its height, which kind of opening it's going to have, lateral center, for example, and where is it going to have the entrance, either the front or even both sides. In this case, for example, I'm going to make it lateral, front, and I'm going to put it here in 2D mode on floor 0, right around, sorry, let me orbit it, right around here. There you go, elevator. Once we have it introduced, it will ask us to add stops with front entry. As you will see here, we have two entries by default. We have inserted in the BIM model two main floors. We have the ground floor at 0 meters and the first floor at 3 meters. But in case we wanted to, we could insert as many floors as we wanted to. So let's keep it as is, for example. And now, if we zoom out, you will see that indeed we have this shadow that we will use later as a reference when we insert all the different levels. If we go back, for example, to the floor view for the first floor, we'll see that now we have a line here that is telling us that we have an elevator ready to be treated right around here. Let's go back to the 3D view and let's show you the final introduction method for lifts. And it is the lift defined by 3 points. As it implies, it's just exactly the same like we have done here before with the ramp and with the staircases. So let me delete first this elevator and some of these elements so we have a cleaner model for your better understanding. Okay, now let's continue with insertion. So we go back to connections and lift defined by 3 points. This is way easier if you compare it to what we have done before here with the elevator / lift. And all we have to do is set on which level it's going to be, ground floor. And now we will start with the main axis of our elevator. We're going to set its width, its height, and if we activate here the 3D mode, to which level is it going to open? So for example, we could make an elevator that does not comply with the floors that we have right now. So for example, let's say it right around here. And the dimensions for the cabin work exactly the same as I've shown you before. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's say, for example, center and both sides, just so you get an idea. And there we have it. This would be a brief overview of how the construction elements tab works here in the architecture tab. And let's say that we have finished with the definition of our construction elements, and we have a bare bones model that in the near future will be ready to be filled with furniture, as you can see here. Although all that we have to do now is set the spaces. The spaces are, as the name implies, an element that will be later exported into the BIM model. Let's check here the BIM model tab to see more or less what we have inserted up until now. As you can see here, the references are automatically added. And in case you wanted to, we could go one by one and change them, or we can change them en masse, like so. If we select it with a left click and shift button, and we can change the different types, the ground floor that it is, the ground level that it is assigned to, its thickness, category, and so on. I'm going to change, for example, these three ones, and I'm going to make them internal partitions, for example. Same thing would apply if we were to look, for example, for the columns, the beams, the openings. As you can see, little by little, our project is starting to take shape. And the last BIM element that we have to insert is spaces. This will be very useful when you want to work with, for example, your thermal analysis or your acoustic analysis, because what CYPE architecture lets you is to either automatically define spaces here. As you can see here, we've got a automatic detection of spaces on plan, or if we wanted to, we could manually insert it by polyline or by wall and floor slab. Let's try, for example, space by polyline, so you'll get an idea of how this works. Let's make a new layer so it can contain all the different spaces. Let's make it active, and let's start with space in itself. As you can see, the window for the space is very similar to the ones that we have seen before. You can set its height, its level, category, if it's either indoor or outdoor, and you can even set colors in case we wanted to color code our spaces, so we can keep track of where our, for example, our kitchens, our water closets, our living rooms, or our bedrooms are, just by color coding them and being able to identify them with an easy view of the eye. So let's insert a space by polyline. What we have to do is that we have to select on a floor plan or on a 3D view, it doesn't matter, the edges of this space. So I'm going to do it in a 2D view, just for variety's sake. Let's activate the 2D mode, and let's continue with the insertion. We select the bounding edges of our room, and once we have it, we right click, and we have automatically added this space right here. Let's rename it, for example, and if we switch to 3D view, you will see that indeed now we have an element that is 2.5 meters high, and that contains all the bounding boxes that we have done before. So this will be later exported into the BIM model as an entity. You'll see here that we go back to the BIM model tab, and we go to spaces. We have here a space called office with a reference, a height, and an automatic surface area that has been calculated with all the parameters that we have inserted before. So let's continue with spaces. Let's add this other space right here, for example, and let's do it in a 3D view so you get an idea of how this works. If we go to, for example, detect spaces by plan, This is another of the options that we can use to detect it. Let's switch to the view and let's detect spaces on plan. For example, as you can see here, I don't have to manually set the edges of this space like I've done before. I could automatically do it with this tool right here with detect spaces on plan. And as you can see here, we have a new space that is 2.5 meters high. And if we switch to the view, you will see that indeed it is 2.5 meters high. And its bounding boxes are these walls that we have here. Okay, so with this, we would have a basic overview of how the architecture tab works. And with all this said, we could switch to the furniture tab. And you may ask, why do we have a different tab for furniture? At first glance, it may seem like a furniture tab is something of an eye candy feature, but quite the opposite. Just like we did before with all the architectural elements here in construction elements, all the furniture elements will be treated as a entity for our BIM module. And as you can see here, we have three main categories. We have furniture, we have sanitary appliances, and garden appliances. This will be used for later if we want to make, for example, a budgeting and we want to budget all the different furniture that is included in our project, because we have inserted here in CYPE architecture our furniture, we will be able later to export it and then import it into our budgeting program, and we will have all the measurements already inserted. If we were to insert, for example, sanitary appliances, we would be able to, as well as what we did before with the furniture, we will also be able to have appliances that will be used for all your building installations. We would be able later to turn it, for example, for electrical mechanisms or for your plumbing needs. And last but not least, here we have the garden tool, which works exactly the same as the furniture tab. And maybe this one is really the most eye candy one. But as you can see here, we can also add swimming pools. So let's go back here to the furniture tab and let's recapitulate what we have seen up until now. Up until now, we have seen how to insert a sketch that we're going to work on top of it. We have seen how to introduce our architectural elements with the help of our sketch or not. And now we are here at the furniture tab. So let's insert some furniture so you get an idea of how we would insert all the different kinds of furniture, some appliances and sanitary appliances. Just like we did before, we can work either in a 3D view, like so, or in a floor view. Let's start with the floor view, for example. Let's start with some basic furniture, and let's add, for example, a table. As you can see here, we are greeted with this new tool, which allows us to set a new reference, for example, table and we can set to which level it is going to be assigned, which type of table it's going to be. Let's make it a desk, for example. And once we have set which kind of type it's going to be, you can see that we have automatically some models preloaded. Let's set a desk table, for example, or an office desk, right? Better. And let's select, for example, this one right here. Now, as you can see, I can insert it with these orientations. And in case I want to put it at a slant, I could set a slant here in degrees. So for example, let's set it at 45 degrees. And you will see that indeed I can insert this element with a slant. And in case I wanted to even be more precise, I could rotate a group of elements here with the edit tool, rotate. Let's select first an insertion point, this one, for example. And as you can see here, I can freely move my element in regards to the reference that I have selected before. Let's rotate it like so, for example. And here we have it. We can also freely move it if we wanted to, just like I did before, for example. And let's continue with many other different kinds of furniture that we can add. Let's go back to the for view here, to the view, and let's insert, for example, some sanitary appliances. You can see here we have many different kinds of sanitary appliances, like for example, wash bins, baths, bidets, toilets, showers, sinks. And just like we did before with the furniture, once you select one element from this list, you can generate all the different kinds of types that we have preloaded here inside architecture. For example, let's set an average square with a mixer, and let's add it right around here. Let's set it like so. And as you can see, I can snap it to my nearest element. Let's say that I wanted to put it right here. And if we go back to the 3D view, you will see that indeed my element has been inserted with all the properties I have set before, and it is flush with the wall. Now let's go back to the 2D view once again, and let's see the home appliances. The home appliances, as you may imagine, are divided into the ones that we will treat it later for the plumbing, and the other ones that will be only used for the electrical mechanisms. So let's insert, for example, a cooker, and you will see that it works exactly the same as we did before. Let's add, for example, one more electrical appliance, one dishwasher, for example. Let's select a thinner one, for example, this one. Way more modern, isn't it? And now that we have it, we would have our very basic kitchen right around here, for example. And last but not least, we have here our garden tools, which right now are mostly eye candy, but in the future, we will be able to insert more models, and we will expand our expressions here. So let's add, for example, a shade right here. Let's switch to the view so we can see it correctly. Let's create a swimming pool, for example, and swimming pools work exactly the same as we have seen before with the horizontal elements. We can insert it as is, or we can insert it as a rectangular pool or a circular pool. So for example, let's insert it with the first option right here. And we can start drawing on a 3D view like so. Let's connect the edges. And once we have it, we have our pool ready to be used. Let's add some trees now that we are at it. Let's add a happy little tree. And just another friend for our happy little tree, as if I were Bob Ross. Now, let's say that you have finished modeling or your building right now. We have gone all through the different tabs right here. We've started with the sketch. We've added up the architectural elements, and we have put some furniture so we can have a little bit of eye candy, and also some elements that we can later turn for our final report on budgeting, for example. Now that we have all of this, what we would do is that we would generate an Ifc file of our project. Here, as you can see, we have a tab dedicated exclusively to BIMserver.center. And what we would have be doing right now is that we will export an Ifc file that we can name whichever we want. For example, architecture new. We can add a description, for example, And once you have it, we will generate an Ifc file that will be automatically updated into our project that we have selected at the beginning of this session. It will take a little while, so meanwhile it is generating our Ifc file, I will show you why would like to generate this Ifc file for. You may be asking, how would I generate, for example, drawings, technical drawings of this architectural model? Well, all you will have to do is, if we go to BIMserver.center, you will see that we have a package of applications that we have called BIM Essentials. If you go to the store, you will see that most of them are free of charge. And then we have put some very basic tools that you can use to make your starting point for a project. So if we were to look here for BIM Essentials, you will see that we have a package with multiple elements that we could use for, for example, we have here BIM quantities that is included into this BIM Essentials package. We also have, for example, I have a node here installed. We have OpenBIM site, which I have told you before. It is meant as a way of setting starting point for a project in a space. Right now, we have very limited support for OpenBIM site, but in the future, you will be able to get, for example, geotechnical data for your structure. And right now, you can get lighting and weather data from OpenBIM site. Then we have site architecture, which is the purpose of the talk today. We have OpenBIM construction systems, which is meant as a way of setting all the different construction systems for the definition of our model. Because up until now, what we have done is a very basic definition, a geometrical definition of our architecture. And we haven't gone into detail in how each element is going to be built in the real world. So to do that, I would do that, for example, with OpenBIM construction systems. And in case I wanted to use my building for, as I said before, energy analysis, acoustic analysis, and so on, I will have to generate analytical model with OpenBIM analytical model. It is very simple, just the click of a button. And as I said before, if you want to make architectural drawings, you would have to work with OpenBIM layout. Let me show you how all these applications work very briefly. And once we finish with this, we will start with a Q&A session at the end of the hour in 15, 20 minutes or something like that. So I have generated my Ifc file and it has been uploaded to the project. And if you go back here to projects, you will see that back here in active projects, I have the BIM Essentials demo. And last change was made 2 minutes ago, sorry, 3 minutes ago by me, and it has this Ifc file. Go back here to the content, you will see that indeed we have here a new Ifc file with all the sketches, the architectural models, the Ifc file, the descriptive reports, and so on. Once I have this Ifc file, I can start working with all the different tools that I've told you about. I can start working with OpenBIM systems, for example, or with OpenBIM analytical model. OpenBIM analytical model is a very simple tool that allows you to turn your architectural data into a simplified version of your building that will be easily understood by all our programs meant for thermal, soundproofing, and so on. Let me show you an example right here. In fact, let me show you a whole example that I've done with site architecture and all the different tools in BIM Essentials. This is an example file that is available for all of you, and it's called Intro to OpenBIM. If we go to the examples here, you will see that we have many different examples preloaded, and one of them, Intro to OpenBIM, is available in all the different projects that we have here. Let's go back, for example, just so you have a brief overview of what you would have to do to start a project in BIMserver.center. You would start first with a model that we have made previously in site architecture, Or you can start directly with a location in Open site. And once you have it, you can generate an Ifc file that will be understood by the rest of these programs and many more. Today, we have made basic architecture in CYPE architecture. We have exported it into an Ifc. And now, if this were our project right here, what we will do is that we would import it, for example, into a BIM analytical model, and you will see that the building looks quite different. And that is because all the different surfaces have been turned and into simplified versions of them that will be easily understood by our programs. And this is just a button, if I'm honest with you. This program, for most of your needs, will mostly be this button here, the analytical model generate. And you will be able to update your project with this new analytical model and start working with it in electrical installations, plumbing, and so on. As you can see here in the BIMserver.center tab, I have a warning here because I created a new file that is called architecture new. And this will be useful because the beauty of it is that once you generate one Ifc file and you make changes in that one, just by clicking here in update, all the different elements will be updated as well. So you don't have to go one by one changing in each individual program what are the new features of your building. So I was talking about open construction systems before, and open construction systems is meant as a way of turning all these different elements that we see here are very generic, just geometries, into things that can be described by layers, by construction layers, that is. Once it's finished loading, I'm going to show you very briefly how it's done. And once we have our model here, our IFC from the architectural, we just need the architectural file in this case. As you can see here, it is importing all the different files that I've uploaded here in my project. What it's going to show is the basic geometry that I have. And do you remember all these little tags that we were putting on each individual element? Well, those tags will be respected and will be imported, so you can group later all the different elements by its characteristics with a click of a button. You will see here now what I've done once it's finished loading. And let's see, for example, on this element right here that we have. Sorry, we have to switch to the architecture. And for example, this wall, you will see here that has a type that's called P15. And if we go back here to the construction systems, once it's finished loading, you will see that I will be able to set all the different layers of construction materials that define this wall. Meanwhile, I'm going to show you how you can generate drawings with OpenBIM Layout. OpenBIM Layout is meant to generate drawings from many different IFC files. You can start with it for your architectural model, but in case you wanted to, you could easily start drawing all the different appliances with all the different IFCs that you have generated. So it's not limited just to the architecture. So in case you have, for example, an IFC file that has been made with one of our structural programs, you import that and start drawing all the different sheet paper here in layout. It's the same that we will be doing right now with the layout for our architectural drawings. Okay, let's go back here to OpenBIM construction systems. And as you can see here, I can set different kinds of construction systems with each layer. I can go one by one and set up the different layers, as you can see here. And what I can do is once I have all my construction systems set, I can assign them manually. And you will see here that I have already done this with all the different elements right here. So for example, if you go back here to construction elements, you will see that I have already set some elements for all the different categories that I have imported. So for example, P15 will be related to this reference right here, and so on. And now here, let's finish with OpenBIM layout. OpenBIM layout allows you to create many sheets with drawings, and it can work, as I showed you before, with many different kinds of Ifc files. Just as long as it is available in BIMserver.center, you can import it here and start your drawings. So I'm going to show you a brief overview of what the main workflow with OpenBIM layout would be. I won't get too much into detail. This could easily be just another different webinar. In case you want to learn more about our programs, in case you feel this webinar has left you wanting to know more, you can go into BIMserver.center, into the store, and you can look at all the different applications. So for example, if you wanted to know more about OpenBIM layout, let's search for layout, OpenBIM layout. You will see here that right beside the download button, we have a button called available resources. You will have tutorials, seminars, manuals, courses, so you can learn more about them. For example, right now we have a quick start guide available on YouTube, and you can use to get a basic idea of how to start working on your own in OpenBIM layout. But just for brevity's sake, the main workflow in OpenBIM layout would be as follows. You would first you will first import or create a template. You have many templates by default. And once you have your template for the title block, you could start with the definition of all the different plans. So you could create any group of sheets, for example, so you can have them all organized by category. And once you have it, you can start adding new sheets. They can have many different templates as long as you have them here in the library. And you have by default many different kinds of formats, so you can print that later. Once you have your new sheet, all you have to do is work with the drawn elements that we have here. You can first set your styles that will be reused all along this software. And once you have all the styles for all the different elements that we'll be adding, like dimensions, texts, fields, and lines, you can start creating your 3D themes. Let's go to the library, and I'm going to show you what it is exactly, this 3D theme menu. The 3D themes allows you to create many different types of views for one kind of IFC or many different kinds of IFCs. As you will see here, if I go to the outline of this project, we have here a models tab, and this menu allows us to select all the different elements that will be shown in this scene. So for example, I can create a scene that only has, for example, all the construction elements without the furniture and vice versa. And once I've created my scene, I can create all the different views. Right now we have two different kinds of scenes, if you recall correctly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a new view. So for example, now let's select space for our viewport. And once we have it, we can select which scene we're going to use. So for example, we can use this very standard one, or we can use this funkier one that I have made before. And we can select all the views. These views are inherited from the model that we have made in CYPE architecture. So as you can see here, all these floors, all these elevation sections, the views have been imported into OpenBIM layout for our later use. So for example, let's select here this view. And I can set the mode, the quality, and the quality when printing as well. I can also add scales if I wanted to. And right now the scale is added specify the zoom level, but I could customize it if I wanted to. So for example, let's set here a scale. Instead of depending on zoom, I'm going to use a predefined scale, like for example 1 to 100. So you don't have to take into account the scale of the document when it's going to be printed. And once you have all your scenes inserted with the viewport, you can start adding all the different elements like lines, arcs, polygons, text boxes, tables, and so on. One of the main advantages of working with OpenBIM layout is that we can read all the different data that is imported into the Ifc file directly with this tool called Tack. I'm going to show you very simply how it is done. As you will see here, once it's ready loading, I'm going to close some things in the background if you allow me. So we have a way smoother experience. Okay. Now we have the Tack Tool activated. And as you will see, if I click in one of the elements, like this one, for example, you will see that it will inherit all the data that we have inserted before into CYPE architecture. We are working at all times with the original modeling, with the original geometry, so we can insert all the different measurements with the scale according to the viewport that we have inserted. So in this case, for example, this viewport, I believe it is a 1 to 100. So all these measurements are already set with the real value of its magnitude, but will be printed once we print it right here with its original value. So once we have finished with the introduction of our basic elements like text, the title box, all the different viewports and so on, we can print it into a PDF file, or we can even export it as an Ifc file, so it can be later imported into other programs if you wanted to. And right now it's 2:30 in my time zone, that is 6:30 in your time zone. Now we will leave a 13-minute question and answer session in case you want to ask something more specific. So don't be shy and go on and ask as many questions as you want in the questions tab here. I'm going to start answering all the different questions right now, if you allow me. Okay. Let's start with this question right here, for example. Can I import furniture template from other software in CYPE? Right now, we cannot import families like we would do, for example, in Revit, but this is something that we have in the near future. Keep in mind that CYPE architecture is a very brand new software that we have launched less than a year ago, and it is completely free of charge. So it is to expect for it to have more potential in the future. So yes, right now we cannot import furniture templates from other softwares, but in the near future you will be able to import and create your very own. Now let's see if we have any more questions. Don't be shy, you can ask as many questions as you want. And I can show you more interactions, for example, with our software and the structural software that we have. This is one of the main features that we have added in version 2022 of CYPE architecture. And that is that we now have a direct export of all the architectural elements into our structural programs. So you don't have to model 2 times the same building. If you want to, I could show you that. And meanwhile, you can start thinking about more questions that you could ask me. We have 20 or 30 minutes more, so there's plenty of time. So for example, if we open again CYPE architecture, I can show you one model that we have loaded into CYPE. Okay, I have another question from here, and it says, how can I add a texture in CYPE? Sorry, in CYPE architecture? Well, if you recall correctly, right now we don't work exactly with textures, but instead what we do is that we work with colors. So if you wanted to import a photorealistic image of your drawing, for example, you would not be able to do so, but in the future, we would be able to do as such. In the meantime, what you could do is that you can insert colors just like I've shown you before here. You can create a new reference and you can set a primary and a second color right around here. And you can apply it to all the different construction elements. For example, if I were to edit this element right here, for example, let's actually facade, sorry. For example, this facade, as you can see, has its individual color here set up. And I could use a different color if I wanted to, just as long as I have set it here in the colors tab. So right now we don't have exactly textures, but this is the nearest that you can have right now. Okay, we have more questions right here. Okay. Do you have any augmented reality or virtual reality apps? Indeed, we have some free applications for visualization of all your projects. And as long as you have an Ifc file uploaded here into your project in BIMserver.center, you can treat it with one of our programs for augmented reality and virtual reality. Let me show you an example. So for example, for augmented reality, we have right now, sorry, let me select first the category. We go to architecture. You will see here that we have the essential part type. Those are the elements I was talking about before, all these different applications. And we also have virtual reality applications I'm going to show you right now. Sorry, it's a little bit finicky. Here, as you can see, we have many third-party applications because you have to bear in mind that BIMserver.center is a store for many different producers. It doesn't have only applications made by CYPE, but we also have applications made by other companies, as you can see here. And for example, you can use these kinds of software made by third parties or the ones made by CYPE to share your programs in a augmented reality or virtual reality headset, as you may imagine. Okay, we have more questions. Okay, how can I, sorry, how can we get more resources regarding CYPE? Well, you can learn more about CYPE in our webpage at CYPE.com, or if you want to, you can go to BIMserver.center here, and for each individual resource that we have here, you can have many different learning resources. For example, if we go back to CYPE architecture here, you will see that we have in its download page in the BIMserver.center store a button called Available Resources, and we have links of interests, tutorials, seminars, courses, and so on. So for example, here in tutorials, we have a series of short videos that can be used as a reference to know how to use all the different tools I have shown you today. So let's see, for example, one of those videos. As you can see here, it is available for free on YouTube. And we have many different playlists for all the different softwares that we are uploading in BIMserver.center. You could also go to seminars that we have done in the past for many different programs, like the ones that we are doing right now. And you can also go to different links of interests, like, for example, our blog in BIMserver.center, where you can have many different resources written in text. for architecture, structures, MEP, project management, and so on. Normally, all these videos are grouped in different playlists, so you can watch them here in our YouTube channel in CYPE International. Okay, it seems that up until now we don't have any more questions, so you're still at time to see more things and to ask for things. And in the meantime, while you're thinking about more questions, I'm going to show you one of the main features that we have added in version 2022 of CYPE architecture in regards to CyPCAD and the importing and exporting of projects made in CYPE architecture. So if we go back to this project right here, you will see that if you go to the BIM model tab, it has an architectural definition for beams, columns, floor slabs, and so on. All of this information can now be exported into our structural analysis programs. And you will see right now an example of this building imported into CyPCAD. So let me open first site menu, and I'm going to show you how this works in CyPCAD. Okay, meanwhile, we have another very interesting question that is, can you use imperial method of measurement, that is feet and inches? For all our programs, we have the same utilities for that, and that is, for example, here in CyPCAD architecture. If we go here to the configuration, we can set the units here, and we can either use the imperial methods, for example, in international system, or the imperial custom area units, feet, inches, pounds, and so on. And once you activate it, when you start using software, you will see that it has indeed changed to this new method of introduction measurement. Let's continue meanwhile with CyPCAD and its interaction with CyPE architecture, which, as I said before, is one of the new features in this version 2022. So in this case, I'm going to show you how you would do that. In this case, you would start a new project, and now let's start a new project, and it asks you if you want to import a BIM model. In this case, because I have my architectural model uploaded into BIMserver.center, I can select my project, and from then on, I can go through this selector here, select my Ifc file for the architecture, and go through all the different steps of this wizard to turn the Ifc file of the architectural file into a native project that can be understood by CyPCAD. This takes quite a while, so I'm going to show you exactly how this would look like once you finish the importing wizard. I'm going to close this program right now, and I'm going to show you how it would look like directly once we have imported our project into CyPCAD. I've already done it in another file, and you will see that indeed all these very different elements that I've shown you before, the walls, the slabs, the beams, the columns, have been successfully exported and now imported into CyPCAD. Let's switch to 3D view, and you will see exactly what I'm talking about. We've turned this model right here, made in CyPE architecture, into something understandable by CyPCAD. And from then on, if we were to tweak this model, we could create a final analysis for our structure. And so with just one basic modeling of our building made in CYPE architecture, we could use that very same Ifc file to generate new Ifc files, like the one that I could generate from right here. As you can see, all the elements have been imported correctly, and most of the data has been recycled from what I've inserted here in CYPE architecture. So I can have, for example, all the different linear loads and all the different compositions for each structural element and so on. As you can see, the beams and the columns have been successfully imported as well. And all this, all those beams and columns have been inserted previously here inside architecture. Let me turn off some more layers, and you will start seeing that this is more or less what I've shown you before here in this view. So let's see if you have any more questions. Well, in regards to mobile apps, yes, we do have also mobile apps for the augmented reality and the virtual reality. So I'm going to show you right now some of those that are available in BIMserver.center. As you can see here, we have two main ways of showing the model to our clients, our construction managers, and so on. And that is either through BIMserver.center Mobile, available for Apple devices and Android devices, as well as BIMserver.center Virtual Reality, available mostly for desktop, for Windows at the moment. As you will see, BIMserver.center Mobile allows you to keep track of your project in real time with all the notifications for all your projects, as well as a quick visualization of how your project is starting to come to life little by little. As you can see here, you can keep track of all the different notifications with all our different switch programs, as well as all the different surfaces that we can work on, such as phones, tablets, smartwatches, and so on. And most importantly, we can view a project with augmented reality. That is, we can make a model of our project that would work as a maquette, as a drafting model that we would do back in the day with wood or plastic. As you can see here, we can directly view it with our mobile devices. We can project it into any different surface. And we can see all the different Ifc files for each individual installation that we have done with all the different programs. And with BIMserver.center Virtual Reality, this is basically all the architects' dream come true, and that is to see the project grow from inside. And as you can see here, with many supported virtual reality handsets, we can get a basic overview of how our project is going to look like, just as long as we have all the different Ifc files loaded. As you can see here, we have structures Ifc file loaded, and most importantly, both of these programs are completely free of charge as well. So you can install them directly from either BIMserver.center, or you can get them from the respective app stores from Microsoft, Apple, and Google, as well as the different programs that I've shown you here in BIMserver.center done by third parties. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. Are your programs also available for Mac? Unfortunately, up until now, we don't have many programs ported to Apple surfaces and so on. So we mostly work with Windows, but in case you have Parallels installed in your operating system, you could easily work with it as if it were a native Windows computer. So there will be no problem whatsoever. In case you have any problems running these programs in Mac, you can keep in touch with us through the technical support department at support@site.com, which I've already sent in the chat right here, so you can have it for later reference. and we can keep in touch there, and one of our technicians can look further into your progress. Okay, we will be finished very soon right now, so in case there are not any more questions, we will be finishing this webinar. So I'll wait a minute or more. And if we don't have any more questions, we will finish this webinar. Okay, so it's 10 minutes to 7 in your time zone. So that means that we are reaching the end of our meeting. So just to have a brief overview of what we have done today, let's go back to my desktop here. And I have shown you that we have these tools that are called the BIMserver.center Essentials, and that you can start a new project either with OpenBIM site or site architecture. Once you have your project started, for example, in site architecture, you can define the geometrical definition of your building with many entities that will be turned into native BIM model entities. You can achieve this task with the help of sketches. And once you have finished the introduction of the architecture, you can complement it with furniture that will be also taken into account when you work with sanitary appliances and home appliances. Once you have finished your definition of the building, you can export it into an Ifc file that will be linked to your project in BIMserver.center. And from then on, you can continue with all the different applications that we have right here for drawing composition, urban planning, construction systems, structural analysis, bill of quantities, and so on. As you can see here in the BIM Essentials that we have installed in my desktop, we could continue with the definition of the construction systems with OpenBIM construction systems. And then we could create an analytical model of our architectural tab here. So it would be used later for other technical programs for fireproofing, lighting, and so on. And then we could create drawings both for the architectural model and the rest of the models with OpenBIM layout. It is also interesting to note here that we have more tools integrated into the BIM Essentials package, like OpenBIM Quantities and OpenBIM Model Checker. OpenBIM Quantities is basically our budgeting tool, which works directly on top of the Ifc file that we have generated here with the architecture of site architecture. And we also have OpenBIM Model Checker, which is meant as a tool to coordinate all the different efforts that we are taking forward when we're working with multiple people at the same time. So we can see all the clashes that we have when we work with the structure and plumbing, or the plumbing and the HVAC, and so on. So that would be basically it. I'm going to check once again if we have any more questions. And that would be it. I hope I've been helpful. If you have any more doubts, you can keep in touch either through our support team, or you can even send me a personal email at my email address at site, which I'm going to share right now in the chat. And I hope that you have found this very interesting and of importance to your relevant professions in the near future.